Good afternoon to everyone and welcome to this local review body for the 13th of February 2023. We have a reasonably full agenda this morning, but before we start, I should do the usual introductions. I am Councillor Bob Braun. I am the convener of the local review body, and with me today on my right is Councillor Hugh Anderson and on my left, Councillor Claire McLaren. We are all, by requirement, members of the Planning Committee. To my far right is Mr. Ross Burton. Mr. Burton is the independent planning advisor and has had no contact with the applications until they were moved forward for appeal. To my far left is Mr. Colin Elliott, our advisor, legal advisor for today, and his far left is Mr. Danny Williams, who is from Committee Services, and it's nice to welcome him back to the committee, even if it's just for one occasion. So welcome back. Now, before we go through onto the agenda, I believe Mr. Burton wishes to have a mention regarding the new National Planning Framework. Mr. Burton.
Yes, thank you, Chair. From 9 o'clock this morning, the development plan in Scotland has changed. Following the government's approval of the 4th National Planning Framework, it is now NPF 4, Local Development Plan 2 and its supplementary guidance. NPF 4 has a strong focus on protecting and enhancing the natural environment and supporting local communities, including an emphasis on 20-minute neighbourhoods, which are settlements where residents can meet their day-to-day needs within a 20-minute walk of their home, through access to safe walking and cycling routes or by public transport. Complementary to this are strategies for compact urban growth, limiting urban expansion and managing development on the edge of settlements. The new national strategy has the stated aim of rebalancing the planning system in favour of conserving, restoring and enhancing biodiversity. Sustainability, both in terms of future development and conservation, is at the heart of the strategy. Managing development in the Greenbelt and the countryside is central to this. In terms of managing local applications, and that's the type of development that are typically considered by this committee, NPF 4 says, proposals for local development will include appropriate measures to conserve, restore and enhance biodiversity in accordance with national and local guidance. Measures should be proportionate to the nature and scale of development and applications for, and it finishes by saying applications for individual household development are excluded from this requirement. In this context, individual household development means house extensions. Where there's a relevant policy in NPF 4 which the committee should note, I'll make mention of this in the material considerations part of my presentation. If I don't make mention of the new National Planning Framework in a particular case, it will be because I don't consider there to be a relevant policy that should form part of the committee's decisions. The Council's Planning Service is currently considering the impact of NPF 4 on its planning policies and guidance, and will be delivering more considered guidance to members in due course. But in the meantime, I hope this brief introduction is helpful.
Thank you very much, Mr. Burton. And we'll take note of that, obviously, as we go along. Colleagues, next part of the agenda is declarations of interest. Can I ask, do you have any declarations of interest, Councillor McLaren?
No, I don't. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Anderson?
I have no interest to declare.
Thank you very much. Next item on the agenda is minutes of the previous meeting. I was the only member present on that one. My two colleagues were not with me, so I'm happy to approve the minutes on that. That can be recorded. So we now move on to the first item on the agenda. This is the erection of a dwelling house and garage land 60 metres northwest of Killiard House, Killiecrankie, and I ask Mr. Burton to introduce.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take you through the pictures that I took on my site visit first. If we could have the first slide, please. It shows an aerial photograph of the site. It's not a particularly good aerial photograph. It's showing this. The site is at the just above where it says B8079. You can see it's a white area. The existing house is to the right-hand side of that, and the application plot is to the left-hand side. Next slide, please. And next slide, please. That shows the application site boundary within the context. Oh, sorry, right. The application site boundary in red there sits to the west of the existing house, and you can see it takes up a portion of the garden ground of the house. Next slide, please. That's the road leading up to the site from the main road, which you can see at the bottom there. Next slide, please. And that's the entrance to the site. You can see that the area surrounding it is heavily wooded. Next slide, please. And standing just within the gates, the application site is on the left beyond the hedge, and the existing house you can see at the end of the driveway. Next slide, please. Existing house with the application site just on the other side of the hedge to the left-hand side of the picture. Next slide, please. And that's looking from in front of the house back towards the application site, which is beyond to the right of the hedge that borders the road, and beyond the boundary, the wall, just in front of the car that's sitting there. Next slide, please. And looking into the site itself, you can see it's largely flat and cleared. It's currently garden ground, and you can see at the end of the site the woodland that surrounds the application site. Next slide, please. And that's looking northwards past the back of the house, looking into part of the back garden of the house, which would remain. So that's taking in part of the existing site and the back garden of the existing house. Again, you can see woodland, mature woodland to the back of the existing house. Next slide, please. And that's inside the application site, looking towards the house. That takes account that shows pretty much the full extent of the application site. The house is proposed to sit in the grassed area that you can see to the foreground. Next slide, please. And we're back to the area of picture. So planning permission is sought for a detached house and garage on land to the west of Killyard House, Killiecrankie, north of the B8079 and the Garry River. A 1.5-storey house is proposed with kitchen, dining room, office and bedroom downstairs and 2 bedrooms upstairs. There's an integral single garage would be included. White render and slate are the proposed materials. The new house would share an access with the existing house off a minor road off the B8079. A separate application for a 1-bedroom house adjacent to Killyard House was approved in December 2022. This ancillary building would be erected immediately to the west of the garage that adjoins Killyard House. To summarise the applicant's case, the proposal is for a house more suited to the needs of the owners of the site who live in Killyard House. The site is within Cairngorms National Park, so the Cairngorms Local Development Plan 2021 is the relevant development plan. Policy 1 of that plan, housing, as a subdivision housing development in existing rural groups, which supports proposals for new housing which adds to an existing group where it connects to and reinforces the character of the group. The application site sits between Old Clune and Killiecrankie in the passive Killiecrankie, where there's significant concentration of houses, which can be read as a series of individual building groups which conform to the policy, or as a larger dispersed building group comprising small clusters of houses interspersed with paddocks and woodland. From either perspective, Killyard fulfills the criteria as a building group. Killyard forms a group with the Braes Cottage and other buildings to the east and Piper's Croft to the north. A map on page 28 of the papers submitted shows this. The new house is proposed to be low carbon design, exceeding current building standards levels. To summarise the report of handling, the development plan for the area comprises the Cairngorms National Park Local Development Plan. The site is located within a rural area, and Policy 1, new housing development, applies. This policy supports rural housing where it meets criteria outlined within applicable categories. Category 1.2 supports housing development in existing rural groups, defined as 3 or more buildings where at least one of which is a dwelling house. The application site forms part of a large dwelling plot which, due to topography and separating distances, does not read as being part of an existing building group. In a wider location, it could be considered that there are 2 small existing groupings, but the site does not relate to either of these and cannot meet the policy criteria as the site is not within an existing group. The remaining category under that policy is 1.3, other housing in the countryside. However, this category is not applicable as the proposal is not A, necessary for the operational and economic viability of an active business, and B, is not on a rural brownfield site. The principle of development on the site therefore does not comply with Policy 1 and supplementary guidance. The proposal is therefore contrary to Policy 1 new housing development of the Cairngorms National Park Local Development Plan, as the development does not form part of an existing rural group as defined in Policy 1.2 and doesn't meet the categories for development in Policy 1.3. Other housing in the countryside as is not necessary for or to improve operational and economic viability and is not on a brownfield site. Representations, there were no representations received. Material considerations. Policy 1 of the Cairngorms National Park Local Development Plan 2021 as identified is relevant. Also relevant from National Planning Framework 4 is Policy 17 Rural Homes. The aim of that policy is to encourage, promote and facilitate the delivery of more high quality, affordable and sustainable rural homes in the right locations. Part C of that policy says development proposals for new homes in remote rural areas will be supported where the proposal 1. Supports and sustains existing fragile communities, 2. Supports identified local housing outcomes, and 3. Is suitable in terms of location, access and environmental impact. Some observations. The applicant takes the view that the proposal complies with the development plan because it can't be seen as part of a dispersed housing group. The Port of Handling takes a different view. The committee must also take proper cognizance of the requirements of National Planning Framework 4. Thank you, Chair. Happy to take questions.
Thanks very much. I think if I may, I'll kick off with some questions here. First of all, as you say, that the picture ahead of us isn't particularly clear, but my understanding, looking at the map I've got in front of me, that there's another house to the north of the roadway there, which is Piper's Croft, I think, on here, and there's also another house to the south east. Bray's Cottage, is that good? That's not a very clear plan.
That's correct, Chair. It's not clear from the aerial photograph there because neither house is on that aerial photograph because there is intervening woodland between all 3 properties.
My other question is how much will it be seen from the main road? Will it be, is there much landscaping between the site and the B8079? Will it be easily be seen?
It's fairly clear to the south, and you can see across because the land it's slightly higher than the road, and the views across the valley are good from the house. As to how visible it would be from the road, it wouldn't be hugely visible from the main road, the B8079. It would be visible from the secondary road that gives access to the house.
And a couple of questions, more technical, I suppose. In the appeal papers, it talks about, obviously this is in the Cairngorms National Park, and the definition of building groups, it seems to be the implication is more flexible with it's in the Cairngorms National Park. And I just wonder if you could clarify that, and if you could just go over the NPF4 view again.
The Cairngorms Local Development Plan does not specify criteria for a building group. It does say that it should be 3 or more buildings, at least one of which is a house. What it does say is, and I can quote you from it, from the relevant part, if you just bear with me. Yes. Policy 1 of the local development plan in the Cairngorms National Park is for housing development, new housing development. And 1.2 of that policy is housing development in existing rural groups. And it reads proposals for new housing development which adds to an existing rural group, brackets, 3 or more buildings where at least one of which is a dwelling house, close brackets, will be considered favourably where, and A, they connect to, reinforce and enhance the character of the group, integrating with the existing built form and pattern of existing development, and B, do not add more than 1/3 to the existing number of buildings in the group. I would suggest that 1.2a is more relevant in that it does mention connecting to the existing rural group and reinforcing and enhancing the character of the group.
It doesn't clarify the closeness of the group. That's what I'm trying to establish, I think.
No, you're quite right. It doesn't clarify how close the group should be. You could take the view that requiring the new development to connect to and reinforce and enhance the character of the group would suggest a certain proximity.
And you mentioned NPF 4. If you could just read that through again for us.
Yes, NPF 4, policy 17, rural homes is relevant. And the stated aim of the policy is to encourage, promote and facilitate the delivery of high quality, affordable and sustainable rural homes in the right locations. And part C of that policy says development proposals for new homes in remote rural areas will be supported where the proposal supports and sustains existing fragile communities and supports identified local housing outcomes, and 3 is suitable in terms of location, access and environmental impact.
Thank you very much. I'll ask my colleagues now. Councillor McLaren, have you any questions?
Thank you. You've probably covered in yours a couple of them, but could I possibly just ask if we go back to slides, because I wonder if I would like to determine that I maybe spotted the gable end of a house, which would suggest it was the Piper's Croft one of those, one of the pictures. No, I think it's beyond that, maybe. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh,
the gable that you see there is the is Killyard House itself. Yeah, I see where you're looking, Councillor. It does look as if that is the gable of a house on the other side of the woodland area there, up the hill. Yes. So that will be Piper's Croft.
so in that respect, with that, you know, if that's 2 properties, I'm going by the Cairngorms National Park, 3 or more, one of which is a dwelling house. It's still a questionable as to define what a group is.
I would suggest it's for that is a matter for the judgment of the committee, whether that house, which you can see on the other side of the wooded hill there, or on the wooded hill above the application site, whether the proximity of that is sufficient to call it part of the same building group.
No, I don't think I do. Thank you.
Councillor Anderson.
just looking at the planning application, I see if we allow this proposal to go ahead, it means an additional road, new road into the existing lodge. Is it house on the plan? Is that being looked for on page 21? Because the existing road to Killiard House has been stopped up if this application goes through, and a new road has to be provided into the house, the existing house. Is that correct?
That is what the plan shows on page 21. You're quite right, Councillor. Yes.
So, well, I'm not sure whether we refuse the Roads Authority being asked on that, whether we get another access. I'm not sure whether there's any reports from the Roads Authorities on that one. It would possibly cause problems if it was refused that new access, because it would come right across the front of the application site.
No, I take your point, Councillor. That is a material consideration, I would say, for the committee today.
Okay, as I say, this building area, the groupings, is it's a disparate site as such. It's yes, so we can view a number of properties in the area, and we'll leave it at that. Just now, my consideration.
Thank you. Okay, so members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is, the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor McLaren?
Could I possibly ask a slight supplementary?
Please do.
Given the topography of the area, is a grouping, would we consider grouping to be of a larger area than of a different topography?
I think from your question you're asking if we can take grouping to be different depending on the topography surrounding or of the area. I mean that would be a matter for committee to take a view on, I have to say. Whether the dispersed housing, the dispersed pattern development in the area, which is caused by, to some extent, by the topography, whether that transfers to allowing the committee to consider a building group to be different here than in many other locations.
I think Mr. Burton has dodged the bullet there, so it's back to you. Have you any other questions there at all? No. Councillor Anderson, are we happy now to proceed?
Happy to proceed.
And I too are happy to go ahead, so I think I'll lead on this one, if I may. This is not a complicated case, but it's a tricky case in its way, because we've got to assess a situation regarding a group. And obviously the officer has made the point about the grouping, and obviously the appeal papers have argued that because it's in the national park, there's slightly more flexibility there. My own thoughts on this one, looking at the plan we have in front of us, which is on page 28 of the report, which covers the whole area, and I know this is quite a distance stretch. I think it's about a mile or so distant along the B8079. In this instance, looking at the area, taking into account NPF4 that you've mentioned, I am inclined to agree the appeal, I think, on this case. It's a stretch, I appreciate that. Looking at Bray's Cottage, Piper's Croft and the existing Killard House as a group, it is a stretch, I appreciate that, but I have a feeling that the house itself will fit into the area in a nice way. I think it will complement the area. So I'm inclined, as I say, to agree the appeal. Obviously, my colleagues have got to make their decision, but obviously, if it goes ahead, then obviously all the standard conditions of a new build would apply. But for now, I'm going to pass on to Councillor McLaren for her opinion.
Oh, thank you, convener. This is a difficult, really difficult one, out with the personal aspects that came with the application. The grouping is what, yes, I agree, we've been asked to consider. Also, national planning framework 4, and clearly the build of this property will meet quite high energy standards with it. So in that respect, support and sustain a fragile community, we you know, that is a consideration as well, I would say, for this application. So I actually am in agreement with you, Councillor Braun, to uphold.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Anderson.
I think I'll make it a unanimous decision to approve the application. There's building groupings as such, they're very disparate. We can't decide A, B, it's got to be within 50 yards or 100 meters or whatever per house in the circle, what circle you're encompassing. And I'm quite happy that the group in here is a reasonable grouping for a Highland area. And the only provision I would like to meet possibly is, bear in mind what I asked about the new access road to the existing lodge, that it would be part of the approval of for the site being developed, that and a suitable approved access would be approved for the lodge as well. I'm not sure whether that's correct to put that in when I would approve the application.
Thank you, Councillor. So, Mr. Elliott, we have a unanimous decision on this one to approve the appeal. Obviously, all the suitable conditions to go on.
Thank you, Convener. Just to deal with the decision, first of all, then I'll come back to Councillor Anderson's comments, but you would be granting it subject to suitable conditions and informatives. There is a possible legal agreement because there's a contribution due of £1,250. However, most likely that would be paid up front to allow the permission to be released. In terms of what Councillor Anderson said, I would actually say no, because you don't have that before you. However, I would suggest that it will be resolved because the ownership's the same house, same family, and they would clearly have the legal right at the moment. That's their access. So they will have the ability, or they're the ones that should be able to resolve it. Mr. Barton, do you want to add anything?
Yes, thanks. I was just going to add that because that's not a classified road, that the access will be taken from, I don't think it would require planning permission in itself. So.
Sorry, last thing, Convener, is from what I understand, you've considered the building group to be the 3 houses that you named. Yes.
Thank you very much. We'll now move on to the next item on the agenda, which is now item 4.2. This is to do an extension, a proposed extension to dwelling house at 58 Fairies Road in Perth. So over to you, Mr. Burton, again.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take you through the pictures first. The first slide, please. So you can see the application site there. Fairies Road is characterised by detached houses, some bungalows, some 2-storey, and you can see the application house has a fairly significant rear extension existing. Next slide, please. So the front of the house, it presents as a bungalow with a dormer, and you can see the rear extension, which was seen in the aerial photograph, is a significant way back from the front of the house. Next slide, please. That's looking at the house and extension as existing in relation to the adjacent house to to the side, which is, as you can see, was built as a two-storey house. Next slide, please. And looking along the road, you can see that most of the houses along the road stretching the other way were originally built as single-storey houses. Next slide, please. This is looking from the back of the application house, and you can see the extension that exists as a kind of carport arrangement. There's a first floor study which is only accessible from the outside. The extension is fairly old, and clearly doesn't meet the needs of the occupants as much as it did. Next slide, please. And looking from further back in the rear garden, you can see the extension pretty much wrapped around the house at the rear of the house. You can see the window that's furthest away is the existing house window. So the extension is all closer to the camera there. Next slide, please. And looking at the extension in relation to the existing house from the side of the garden. Next slide, please. And looking at the, you can see a window from the original house just before the boundary to the adjacent house. Next slide, please. And looking from the rear garden at the houses behind, you can see there's a substantial two-storey house. It's the closest house at the rear. Next slide, please. And back to the aerial photograph. So planning permission is sought for an extension to a two-storey detached house in Fairies Road, Perth. On the ground floor, the extension would add an integral garage and games room to the side of the house, where there's currently a covered courtyard. The upper floor, which currently has 2 bedrooms and an office which is separate from the rest of the house, would have 4 bedrooms. The greater depth of the upper floor would necessitate a flat roof to keep the height of the building down to no more than the existing height. Materials would match those existing. To summarise the applicant's case, the case officer's reliance on an outdated street view was not sufficient to assess the application. All the matters raised in pre-application discussion have been addressed. The extension respects the shape, scale and proportions of the existing building and relates sympathetically to the roof pitch and original building depth. The extension is not dominant and complements the existing building by matching the existing materials. The scale, massing, form and design are all sympathetic and have no impact on existing amenity levels. The proposed extension will raise the number of rooms in the house from 8 to 10, contrary to the case officer's assertion that the accommodation would be more than doubled. The flat roof proposed will not be visible from any viewpoint, so cannot be considered to be dominant. Previous extensions allowed in the area are mentioned, in particular one at 7 Murray Road, Perth, for which planning permission was granted in 2006 to extend a 5-bedroom bungalow to a 10-room, 2-storey house. To summarise the report of handling, the proposals are considered unsuitable in terms of scale, massing, form and design, and will have a detrimental impact on established amenity levels. The property has been subject to various past alterations and has likely reached its limit of acceptable development. The setback nature of the existing addition and open carport structure helps to mitigate its impact. Dormer windows have been installed and the roof space has been converted to provide 2 additional bedrooms and an office space. The proposal will effectively more than double the original accommodation and result in a large imposing mansard type roof with dominant flat roof. A double garage will be formed just behind the main frontage. Additional dormer roof windows and skylights will be installed. The north-facing side elevation will extend to over 40 metres in depth within 1 metre of the boundary. Overall, the changes are substantial and will cumulatively appear visually disjointed, top-heavy, and lacking any uniformity or integration with the host unit. The proposals, by reason of their excessive scale and proportions, will engulf what remains of the original bungalow and erode its distinctive character and charm to the detriment of the wider street scene. So the development proposals are not subordinate to the existing house and would be incongruous and overbearing to the detriment of visual amenity and character of the application site and wider area. There were no representations received. Policy material considerations, policies 1A and 1B and 17 of the local development plan are correctly identified in the handling report as material. Observations on the proposal. The proposed extension would add a further room upstairs and another room and integral garage downstairs. It would create a flat roof over part of its structure, but would not increase any overshadowing or overlooking impacts on surrounding houses. The decision for the committee is whether the extension would be in accordance with policies 1A and 1B of the local development plan and placemaking guide 2020. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Burton. We'll open up now to questions. Councillor McLaren.
Thank you, Mr. Burton. Yeah, I'm cramped and over intensive development of the site. My eyes keep getting drawn to that. And could we possibly go back to a picture that shows the property at street view? Yeah, thank you. Yes, I think I'm labouring, so just I'll pass. Thank you.
Councillor Anderson.
Just a question on floor area of the ground that the house occupies. It's how much is it going to be extended by squaring it off, taking, it's the area up on the screen to the right. The house is coming forward, isn't it, about to build? But how much percentage increase of floor area, the ground floor area of the house?
I'm not sure that we're told what percentage the increase is, Councillor. It was certainly the double garage would be just behind the frontage of the house as you see it there. So in effect, the dormer window that's on the extension at the rear would be brought forward to practically the same level as the street frontage, as the front elevation of the house. So that area that you see beyond the blue gate would be filled in. It would be floor space, albeit part of it would be double garage.
Thank you.
Thanks. A couple of questions. We haven't got the plan up in front of us now, but if we remember that one, looking at the plan at the top, the north side of our look, if we're looking at it, is that basically what we're doing is filling in the area between the carport and the gate? Basically, we haven't got the plan up now, but they will shut. Yeah.
What's proposed on there is that the rear of the house would be pretty much where it is just now, and the front of the house would, the front of the extension to the side would come right up to just short of the front elevation of the house. So all of the area that you can see that's driveway to the side of the house there would become floor space. And as well as that, there would be a bedroom above that area.
Thanks. And just clarifying the roof side of things, the new extension obviously would have a ridge roof, but that existing extension at the back, would that stay with a ridge roof or would that become a flat roof? Because then we'd have two ridge roofs, if I can say that, if you follow me.
Because of the depth of the house of the new extension, taking account of the existing extension, there will be a flat roof from roughly from the ridge of the extension there forwards. Because if it were to be a pitched roof over that, then the ridge height would be significantly higher than that of the existing house.
Thank you very much. So that's the end of my question. So members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is, the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor McLaren.
Happy to proceed.
And Councillor Anderson.
Pleased to proceed.
And I too am happy to proceed. So I'll ask Councillor McLaren if you'd like to lead off on this one.
Thank you, convener. Yeah, again, another difficult one, but that's what this committee's about. The proposals, by reason of the excessive scale and proportions, will engulf what remains of the original bungalow and erode its distinctive character and charm. And I see that to be factual, and so I am in agreement with our officers and that sit on the refusal, agree to the refusal of the application. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Anderson.
I'd move approval of the plan in front of us. It's a modest increase of the floor area of the house and no real loss of garden area. But the house to the downside of it, on its right, is a two-storied house. So it's not affected by the works that are in hand and planned here. So I would move approval of the application.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. And I'm afraid on this occasion, I too am going to agree that with you, Councillor Anderson, that to approve the appeal. I saw the site myself, and by chance met the lady of the house, and she explained roughly what they're trying to do. The rear extension it seems to be outdated, and it's very odd extension at the rear, which is a shame it's there really, but it's there, and we are where we are, so we have to work with that. But the amount of change I think is minimal. It's bringing the rear extension forward to roughly to the gate and squaring off the front. I don't see a major problem with that. There are houses around the area with all different shapes. I don't think it would look out of place, to be honest. So I'm happy to approve the appeal on this occasion. Thank you. So I think we have a majority decision on this one, Mr. Elliott.
Yes, thank you, Convener. By majority, that is grant subject to suitable conditions and informatives, and the kind of minority view by Bailey McLaren is to refuse per the appointed officer. Okay.
Thank you, members. So we'll move on now to the next item on the agenda, which is item 4.3, and this now relates to siting of 2 static caravans for welfare storage use, erection of animal shelter and associated works, part of which are retrospective, for a temporary period on land 100 metres northeast of Blair Fordell Farm in Kelty. Mr. Burton, if you'd introduce.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take you through the pictures, which you might not find as helpful as usual because of the difficulty of getting close to the site. The site boundary is shown on the aerial photograph there. It's down what looks like a road, but was in fact a fairly muddy track. And it's one of a number of parcels of land that have been sold on by a local farmer. Next slide, please. So the track from the main road to the site, that's looking back towards the road. You can see there's open farmland all around. Next slide, please. And that's looking down to the corner, not towards the site as such, but there are other buildings situated close to the track, buildings of different sizes and shapes. Next slide, please. And looking towards the site, you can see in the distance structures, and they are actually on the application site, just beyond the field with the Highland cows that you can see in the foreground. Next slide, please. So this is the kind of structure that is proposed, and you can see there's a number of different sizes of structures already there, fencing of various different types and sizes as well. Next slide, please. You can see in this slide there's a further caravan-sized structure slightly further away on the application site. Next slide, please. Getting as much of a close-up as I can to that further away building, you can see there's quite a lot of fencing, different types of fencing on the landscape in between the application site and the road. Next slide, please. So, what is proposed here is the siting of 2 static caravans and an animal shelter on farmland to the northeast of Blairfordle Farm in Kelty. The application is in part retrospective. Development has been the subject of an enforcement notice which the applicant has appealed. The reporter confirmed the notice, thereby refusing the appeal, allowing some additional time for compliance until September last year. The application site is a field in open countryside reached by a track remote from any other buildings. The applicant proposes a variety of uses on the land, all agricultural, growing of vegetables, fruit trees and botanicals, and an animal shelter and goat pen. The static caravans are 9.7 metres long and 3.2 metres wide. It's proposed to clad them both with timber. The animal shelter is 3 metres wide and 5.9 metres long and is triangular in shape. The highest part rises to 2.3 metres. It's intended to resemble a ship. A previous application for the siting of 2 static caravans for welfare / storage facility use / occasional overnight accommodation and 1 touring caravan for storage use and erection of an animal shelter, occasional informal camping and associated works was refused by the Council in October 2021. To summarise the applicant's case, the caravans have been situated to minimise visual impact and would have the appearance, once clad in timber, of traditional small-scale agricultural buildings. It's proposed to plant trees around the boundary of the land to provide a visual buffer and a windbreak. The buildings on site are considered to be an appropriate scale and design and are conducive to the rural character and visual amenity of the area, as required by policies 1A and 1B of the Local Development Plan and as outlined in Policy 8. To summarise the report of handling, the applicant notes that she understood the works on site to be covered by Class 18 of the General Permitted Development Order. That order requires the submission of a prior notification application, which was not submitted, and requires that those structures should be requisite for the purposes of agriculture. It's not considered that static caravans which have not been designed for agricultural purposes can meet this requirement. However, as the site has been developed already, the applicant cannot investigate the prior notification process and planning permission is required. The applicant has not applied for the development of a rural business under Policy 8, Rural Business and Diversification, although references are made to the application, and the application is not supported by a business plan, which would be a requirement under that policy. There is no site-specific resource or opportunity which makes the site different from many other rural parcels of land, and it's considered that the applicant does not have a justified proposal for development at the site. While the Council is generally supportive of the ecological ideas and aspirations the applicant has, this proposal is not considered to meet the policy requirements, and it's therefore considered that siting is not appropriate for the rural setting and has not been justified as to why they are essential to manage this small piece of land. While precedent cannot be given as a reason to refuse an application, this type of sporadic development, if allowed throughout Perth and Kinross, would have a detrimental impact on the wider landscape character of rural areas. 15 public representations were received, giving grounds of contrary to the local plan, unacceptable access, insufficient drainage information, flood risk, no waste collection facilities, potential use for residential or overnight accommodation, lack of supporting information, damage to bridge on access road, light pollution, noise pollution, mining risk area, impact on listed buildings, impact on historic interests within the area, increase in traffic, road safety concerns, adverse effect on visual amenity, inappropriate land use, out of character with the area, loss of trees, loss of open space, and lack of car parking. Material considerations, Policy 1A and 1B, placemaking, and Policy 8, rural business and diversification, are the most relevant policies. Some observations. The applicant lives in Burnt Island, approximately 10 miles from the application site. The applicant has stated that their long-term aim is to erect a permanent building on the site. The question before the committee is whether the buildings proposed here, which have been the subject of enforcement proceedings, and the longer-term permanent building mentioned are necessary for the agricultural operations outlined by the applicant. If they are, the application should, as stated in the handling report, be supported by a business plan in order to satisfy relevant local development plan policy. Thank you, Chair. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Burton. Councillor Anderson, any questions?
The question I'd ask is, say you've come to there's been no business plan, therefore one can't really assess the need or the hours to be worked on that agricultural holding since there's no business plan prepared for us to go forward. So that, well, I would feel that might negate some of the reasons on the applicant's application. So that's all I want to say. Thank you.
You have no questions at all?
Well, since there's no plans.
Okay. Councillor McLaren.
Yeah, there really was no real evidence in the pictures of any real agricultural activity on the site, was there?
There wasn't, Councillor, and when I made my site visit, there was no activity that I could see on the site at all.
Yeah, thank you. It's, yeah.
Just a couple of questions. In the paperwork, there's a lot of mention of and I use inverted commas, pirate ship built on the land. Did you see that at all? Is that there?
I didn't get close enough, Councillor, to cite it, but from the description, the animal pen is shaped to resemble the hull of a ship.
And the other thing, on the photographs, there looked like there's some sort of construction going on in the background. Was that on that particular plot, or was it somewhere else?
It was hard to tell, Councillor. I didn't see any. I didn't note any activity on the application site. There's quite a lot of activity round about it. There seems to be, I would guess, there's a bit of a history of activity in that immediate area.
Thank you. Councillor McLaren, do you want another question?
If I could be allowed to do so. To clarify, the caravan, am I correct in assuming there that the caravan in the picture is one of the static caravans that they're applying for permission for?
That's as I understand it, Councillor, yes.
Okay, members, so we'll move on to the next stage. Can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is, the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor Anderson. Councillor McLaren.
Also happy to proceed.
And I too am happy to proceed, and I'll lead off on this one if I may. An interesting application, a lot of conflicting information in it. As Mr. Burton mentioned, there are 15 representations, all of which contain certain information with photographs about other activities on the site. And we also mentioned a pirate ship. I've not seen an animal pen ever designed as a pirate ship or the hull of a ship before, but there we are. I think on this basis, quite simply, I think because of all the conflicting information, because of what the history of the site is, I'm merely going to move to refuse the appeal outright. Councillor McLaren.
Thank you. Yeah, in agreement with you about confusion of information. and an animal shelter. I just feel yes, there's too much confusion here, and I too am in agreement with you, Councillor Braun, to refuse in its entirety the application, and thank you.
Councillor Anderson.
I would concur with the other members. Refuse application.
So, Mr. Elliott, we have a majority, a unanimous decision again, obviously refused based on the conditions of the officer's report.
Yes, thank you, Convener. Take it to page 153, which is the additional grounds of refusal. As I understand it, you've unanimously refused in line with those. Could I suggest slight tidying up? It should be Perth and Kinross Local Development Plan 2 2019, and it's a matter for yourselves, but it could be policy 1A on the first one.
That's fine.
Technical
That's
tidy
fine.
up.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yes.
Thank you
Okay,
very much.
thank you.
Okay. We'll now move on now to item 4.4, which relates to the erection of a dwelling house, land 40 metres northwest of 11 Glenala View, Airlie View and Ailith. Mr. Burton, if you'd introduce for us this one.
Thank you, Chair. If we could look at the first slide, please. Right, the application site is outlined in red there, and you can see it's a fairly heavily wooded site on the corner of Airlie Road. The houses to the west of that you can see that are under construction are being built by the applicant to this site, who owns the site as well as the development site to the west. Next slide, please. So this is looking down Airlie Road towards the corner there. There are established houses along the left-hand side of Airlie Road. The application site is just at the far end of the road, as you can see it. Next slide, please. You can see the change in fence line, or the change in the type of fencing rather, delineates the application site. It's at the end of the road here, and you can see there's a truck parked beside it. You can see the mature trees that are on the other side of the fence. Next slide, please. That fence, the higher fence denotes the edge of the application site. It's beyond that. Next slide, please. It's looking straight towards the fence, and you can see there's a fair number of mature trees directly behind the fence. Next slide, please. And looking from within the new housing development, the new fence that you see to the left of the truck that's parked delineates the boundary of the application site as well. Next slide, please. This is showing the entrance to the sewage pumping station, which is now been established to serve the new housing development. Next slide, please. That's the structure you see on the left-hand side is the corner of the new sewage pumping station, and you can see the site itself is quite a bit lower than the street, and you can see it is surrounded to a large extent by mature trees and contains mature trees within it. Next slide, please. And just looking at the site from a slightly different angle, as you saw on the previous one, the site sits lower than the road, and it slopes downwards towards the burn. Next slide, please. So, planning permission is sought for the erection of a detached house on land adjacent to a recently consented and under construction housing development by the same applicant at Airlie View, Ailith. The site slopes downwards from the road towards the back burn, and the proposed house would sit on steel poles, meeting the ground only at its westernmost point. The site currently has a number of mature trees and adjoins a recently constructed sewage pumping station built to serve the adjacent housing development. Internally, there would be 2 bedrooms, a shower room, and a kitchen, dining, living area. There would also be a covered balcony facing the burn with a sauna, shower, and hot tub. The house would be finished in timber and slate cladding with a corrugated steel roof. To summarise the applicant's case, the application site currently attracts fly tipping. The site is challenging and the proposed house uses an innovative design specially designed to minimise its impact on the woodland. Only 4 trees would need to be felled, and these would be replaced, if consent were granted, by 8 new trees elsewhere on the site. The ecological appraisal carried out by the applicant made recommendations which will ensure that the development provides a net biodiversity gain. The appraisal included an assessment of bat roosts, which recommended all trees identified as providing potential bat roosts should be subject to a specialist bat survey to identify whether bats are present. To summarise the report of handling, Policies 1, placemaking, Policy 17, residential areas, Policy 40, trees, and 41, biodiversity, are all directly applicable. Policy 1 seeks to ensure that all new developments do not have an adverse impact on the areas in which they are located. Policy 17 looks to ensure that new development within settlements are compatible with surrounding land uses. Policy 40 looks to protect existing trees from unnecessary removal. Policy 41 seeks to ensure that suitable habitat surveys are submitted so that the impact on both local and protected wildlife can be assessed. The site is an awkward shape that is out of character with its surroundings, and the development would include the removal of trees and potential damage to a number of others, which in turn would impact adversely on the visual amenity of the area. The level of usable amenity space would also be affected by existing trees and would be affected by overhead canopies that would inevitably block light. This could potentially lead to further tree loss. The proposed house and access would result in 4 direct tree losses and the potential permanent damage to a number of other trees. The required tree loss and any likely additional loss would have an adverse impact on the visual amenity of the area. The position of the dwelling at the eastern end of the plot would also create an uneasy relationship with the neighbours to the east, as it would be located and could result in difficulties if windows are added to in the future to the east elevation. In terms of the actual design of the house, in isolation it is inoffensive. However, it will be squeezed into an awkward shaped site and be positioned only a matter of metres from the back boundary with limited usable amenity space. A good proportion of that amenity space would be affected by the tree canopy. An ecology survey has been submitted, which includes an assessment for bats. The survey recommends a further survey was necessary, but that doesn't appear to have been undertaken or submitted as part of the application. In the absence of this, it has not been demonstrated fully that protected species, notably bats, have been fully assessed and mitigation options made available. One letter of objection was received on the following grounds: impact on trees, impact on wildlife, inappropriate land use, contrary to the development plan. Material considerations, policies 1, 17, 40 and 41 are all material as laid out in the handling report. Some observations: the applicant has chosen not to submit a full bat survey, although their own ecological appraisal recommends it. The proposed house would be 1 metre from the boundary with number 11 Glenisla View. While that elevation has no windows, the ridge height, because of the ground levels, would be approximately 7 metres high at its highest point, including the structural supports. Thank you, Chair. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Burton. We'll open to questions. Councillor Anderson.
Just wonder, the amount of trees on this site, are any of them protected by TPOs?
That's my understanding, Councillor, that they're not protected.
But proposals are the trees are going to be positioned very close to the house site. I'm sure there are some guidance on how far houses should be away from trees or large trees to give them a chance, trees to grow over.
Not guidance that we're party to here, Councillor. I'm afraid it would be a matter of judgment as to whether the committee feels that trees other than the 4 that are identified as having to be removed would be affected by the development.
Yeah, I've seen, I'm sure in the past, trees affected, not trees, but even the property's been affected by the tree roots. And too close to the house is not the best. But I have my reservations on the trees that are coming down and the trees that are being left. So
Do we have a
I'll
question?
leave it. I'm not taking a question on that now.
Okay, thank you. Councillor McLaren.
I am happy with the contents of Mr. Burton's submission. Thank you.
And I too have no questions on this one. So members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? So Councillor Anderson, are you happy to proceed?
Happy to proceed.
And Councillor McLaren?
Oops, sorry.
Happy to proceed. Thank you.
Thank you. So Councillor Anderson, if you'd like to lead off on this one.
I would support the council in refusing the application because of, I say, the reason for still waiting a second bat survey. I think results of that as well. But I'm moving refusal of the application because of the damage to the trees. Location is so close to the boundary of the site the house to be built. It breaks not quite a number of rules, so I'd support the planning officer's recommendation to refuse.
Thank you, Councillor. I too am in a thought to refuse this one, to refuse the appeal, and to go with the conditions and reasons for refusal as laid out by the planning officer. It's an odd site, odd-shaped site with a pumping station now pretty much in the middle of it. There is comment in the paperwork, I'm not sure where it is now, mentioning that it'd be good to return it back to nature, which I think is a good idea. Nice bit of open space. I'm sure the applicant can find some way to shield it, to ensure that little fly tipping, and I'm sure they'll maintain the area if fly tipping does occur. The fact that it's a building site obviously does attract people to fly tip, so when that's finished and the works are done and they return it to as it is, that may obviously deter some of the fly tipping. But I'm of a mind to refuse the appeal on this occasion. I'd also say that I think the style of house which was proposed would seem to be out of character with the rest of the properties around the area. So as I say, refuse appeal. Councillor McLaren.
Thank you. I too would agree with our officers and uphold the refusal in the entirety that they have laid out in the papers. And yes, it would be for the community to have that area return to more of a green space use area. That would be of a greater benefit to the community and the new housing. And I do hope that the applicant, as you have suggested, finds a way to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Mr. Elliott, a unanimous decision again, I think.
Yes, thank you, Convener. Unanimous decision to refuse. Take to pages 345, 346 of your papers, which is the original grounds of refusal. Can I make one suggestion for technical change on ground one? At the moment it says it's policy 40B, trees, woodland development, Perth Cross Local Plan 2, 2019, which seek to avoid the necessary removal of individual groups of trees. I think the word necessary is incorrect there. It means the opposite. So if you took the word necessary out, it would read, which seek to avoid the removal of individual groups or trees. Otherwise, Convener, I noted you did refer to the style of house, but that's not within the grounds of refusal. But I mean, I think that's an observation rather than part of the grounds of refusal. So
Well, just a personal comment. Yeah, that's fine. Thank you very much. Okay, we'll agree on that, I think. So we'll now move on to item 4.5, which is the change of use from agricultural land to form extension to garden ground and erection of a shed at Toscana in Whiteley Road in Burton. Mr. Burton again, please.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. I'll take you through the pictures first. We'll start with an aerial photograph. The application site is bounded in red. There you can see it's a grassed area. The dark shape you can see within the red line boundary is a pond, a small pond. When I visited, there were some geese in the pond. There is also a, as you'll see in the pictures, there's also a chicken coop on the land, and it's used for those purposes. Next slide, please. So looking at the application site boundary, that's the application. That's the applicant's house on the left-hand side. The driveway is would form part of the access to the site, which is to the right-hand side of the fence there, of the head rather. Next slide, please. And that's looking into this, looking towards the site from the main road. Next slide, please. So that's the site in its entirety from the main road. Its far boundary you can see is a post and wire fence, and it's a grassed area which sits slightly lower than the road. Next slide, please. Looking upwards, looking towards the main road from the house driveway. The application site is to the left-hand side. It's beyond the timber fence that you can see on the left-hand side of the driveway. Next slide, please. And that's looking back towards the applicant's the application house garden. You can see further buildings beyond that, but that's the existing garden of the main house, which wouldn't be affected by the proposal. Next slide, please. That's looking through what access there is between the application house and the application site. You can see the site is largely flat, and you can see the structure in the centre of the photograph there, which is the chicken coop. Next slide, please. And inside the site, you can see it's a rectangular site with post and wire fence on the left-hand side is the boundary, and you can also see the post and wire fence at the end, which forms a boundary to the adjacent field. Next slide, please. And looking from within the site back to the applicant's house. Next slide, please. And that's back to the aerial photograph. So, planning permission is sought for the use of an area of land to the site of the applicant's house as an extension to the garden of the house and the erection of a storage unit. The site is located on the western edge of Burlton, just outside the settlement boundary as defined in Local Development Plan 2. The storage unit would measure 8 metres by 15 metres and would be 3.7 metres in height. It would be finished in grey composite cladding. A vehicular access is proposed to the shed from the existing driveway. The applicant runs an antiques business. Currently, the integral garage attached to the house appears to be part of the storage for antiques for that business. The applicant also runs a property development business and has previously unsuccessfully applied for planning permission for the residential development of the application site, most recently in 2013 for 2 houses. To summarise the applicant's case, the site has been used as garden ground since 2004 and currently has a pond and a small chicken coop. In view of the fact it's been used as a garden ground for over 10 years, that is the site's established use. The shed will be painted olive green and will blend sympathetically with the surrounding countryside and farmland to the west and south. It will not have a detrimental impact on the character, quality and amenity of the place. To summarise the report of handling, Policy 6, Settlement Boundaries, says that built development on sites that adjoin the settlement boundary will only be permitted in certain circumstances, such as where justification is made under Policy 8, Rural Business and Diversification. For this to apply, a specific operational or locational need must be demonstrated. The development of the storage shed is contrary to Policy 6 of the Local Development Plan. No justification has been submitted for the shed, and no specific locational need has been demonstrated. The use of land that adjoins the settlement boundary is potentially acceptable as garden ground, although the scale of ground proposed in this case is of concern, and the proposed layout of the site does not appear to lend itself to being integrated into the garden ground associated with adjacent property and for domestic purposes. There are no obvious links between the two sites, which are separated by a 1.8 metre high timber fence. Toscana has garden ground of around 500 square metres, so an extension proposed of an area of nearly 4,000 square metres would be a significant increase. The siting of a large industrial style shed in the centre of the proposed garden is not appropriate for domestic use, nor is the separate access and hard standing proposed. There's little information submitted to suggest what the shed will be used for, and it's noted that the eastern roller door entrance does not relate to the proposed hard standing area. Placemaking policies require development to respect the surroundings and contribute positively to the quality of the surrounding environment. This proposal fails to do this, and as such is contrary to policies 1A and 1B, placemaking of the local development plan. Land capability and national scale maps show this as Class 2 land. The applicant has said it hasn't been farmed for some time. However, the land is still classed as prime, so policy 50 of the local development plan, which seeks to safeguard prime land for agricultural use, is relevant. While some small-scale development is potentially acceptable on prime land, this should meet a specific established need and should only be considered where it's compatible with other aspects of the policy framework, and no other suitable site is available on non-prime land. In this case, the proposal for built development on the land is contrary to policy 6, so development is not supported for other policy reasons. One representation was received, and the reasons given were impact on trees, and trees are not shown in the site plan. The block plan shows 2 accesses, and there shouldn't be 2 accesses on traffic and road safety grounds. Incorrect identification of public pavement to the south of Whiteley Road, as there is no pavement. Contrary to the development plan, would extend beyond settlement boundary, and potential change of use of land from residential to commercial. Material considerations, policy 6 settlement boundaries is relevant, as are policies 1A and 1B placemaking and policy 50 agricultural land. Also of relevance is policy 5 of National Planning Framework 4, soils. Section B of that policy says development proposals on prime agricultural land or land of lesser quality that is locally important will only be supported where it's for one of 4 specified categories. Essential infrastructure, where there's a specific locational need and no other suitable site. Small-scale development directly linked to a rural business, farm or croft. The development of production and processing facilities associated with the land produce, or the generation of energy from renewable sources or the extraction of minerals, where there is secure provision for restoration. Also, if the proposal is considered to be acceptable under one of the above, the layout and design of the proposal must minimise the amount of protected land that's required. Some observations on the application. The applicant claims the application site has been used as garden ground since 2004, so that is its established use. The planning history of the site, however, does not identify it as garden ground. The submission of an application for a certificate of lawfulness for garden ground would be a suitable means of establishing the use for planning purposes. The committee must take proper cognizance of the above quoted policy from National Planning Framework 4, which seeks to ensure that valued soils are protected and restored. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Burton. A couple of questions there that come to mind. As you said, this is, although it's been used technically possibly as a garden ground for more than 10 years, it is classed as agricultural land, class 2, I believe. And following on from that, a technical point, perhaps, but if you're keeping chickens and geese on that ground, are you not actually using it for agricultural purposes?
When I visited the site, it was clear that there were hens on the site. There's a chicken coop there. So it's land that could be associated with farming, I guess, or a use rather, which could be associated with farming.
And the other point is the proposed shed, quick conversion, is something like 48 feet by 26 feet wide. It sounds more like a warehouse than a shed.
It certainly seems larger than a domestic shed would normally be.
Councillor McLaren.
Well, thank you. I think maybe my questions were slightly covered by you, Councillor Braun again. Or mine seem to be thinking the same way. I mean, it's not large scale agriculture, and it could be viewed that the animals could be pets, but currently it is out with the settlement boundary. That is correct. I'm fully correct on that.
That's correct, Councillor.
Yes, so thank you. So therefore, the policies, it's not, but sorry, I'm rambling. I think I'm finished my questions. Thank you.
Councillor Anderson.
I was just looking at the block plan on page 409 and behind it to 410. It seems a substantial replacement garage for, you know, what he's asking for anyway. And the position of the garage where positioned to the side is not so convenient to his house or from security purposes. I feel it's a funny, odd situation of where to place this shed. But he's not here to answer for that, unfortunately. But it's not central to the plot as such to be a position for a shed next to his house for security purposes and everything else. I would have thought.
We need a question for Councillor Anderson.
I find it an odd.
I'm sorry, we need a question, Councillor Anderson. We're not in debate yet.
I'm afraid I don't have that information, Councillor. I would point out, though, that it's not proposed, the building on site isn't proposed, on the application site isn't proposed as a garage, but as a storage shed.
No further questions.
Thank you, members. So on that basis, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor McLaren.
Happy to proceed.
Councillor Anderson.
No further questions, and
I too am happy to proceed, and I'll lead off on this one. I did visit the site myself. It is a substantial piece of ground. I accept the fact that it may well be used as garden ground, but it is still agricultural ground as such, and still classed as agricultural ground. It is outside the settlement, so I think policy 6 does apply. I'm of the view that there isn't sufficient information here to grant the appeal. The other concern I have, the major concern actually, is the fact that this is a sizable building proposed, some 48 feet by 24 foot, which is going to be a problem, I think, with residential amenity. It's out of place where it's proposed to be sited. It's a sizable building, and I think just doesn't fit the land that's there. So I'm of opinion to refuse the appeal and concur with the reasons for refusal as put forward by the planning officer. Mr. Burton's mentioned National Planning Framework 4, and I think there needs to be perhaps another condition on that basis. But before we get that far, let me ask my colleagues their views first. So,
Commissioner, I just came in, it may have been a slip, but you said grant the appeal, and then you said refuse the appeal.
It's refused the appeal. I think a slip of the tongue there.
It did seem a slip earlier on when you said grant the appeal.
No, refuse the appeal and accept the reasons behind the refusal as put down by the planning officers. Yeah, to refuse the appeal. So I'll pass on to Councillor McLaren.
Thank you, Convener. With the information in front of us, it's unfortunate that, yes, you know, there's a suggestion that it is part of garden ground, but it's zoned as it's out with the settlement boundary, sits out with, so therefore the policies that we have to work under and around are what was stated by our officers in their original refusal. So given all that in front of us, I too vote to uphold the refusal, and I would hope that maybe in our consultation process for the local development plan 3, the applicant may be able to look at the settlement boundary issue in that consultation process.
And Councillor Anderson.
I concur with all of the reasons given by other members of the panel.
Okay, Mr. Elliott, we have a unanimous decision again today. But as I mentioned, perhaps a slight change or another condition. Perhaps now we've got an NPF 4 to think about. But
Convener, yes, I think direct you to page 387, which is the original grounds of refusal. I didn't hear any suggestion of any change to grounds 1 and 2, but my understanding, Convener, is you're proposing an additional ground on primarily NPF 4.
I think we'd have to mention it because Mr. Burton obviously mentioned that it's now in play. So I was going to suggest, if I may, a third condition along the lines of the proposal is contrary to NPF 4, Policy 5, Soils, and Policy 50, Prime Agricultural Land of the Perth and Kinross Local Development Plan 2, 2019, as the proposal involves the loss of prime agricultural land and it does not fall within the permitted exceptions. That's my rough wording.
Yes, thank you, Convener. I do have that as a third ground of not condition but refusal. And as you've narrated, contrary to National Planning Framework 4, Policy 5, Soils, and Policy 50 of Prime Agricultural Land LDP, as you've narrated, for the reasons outlined.
Thank you. So we'll now move on to our next item, which is item 4.6. I'm sure we've all noted that 4.6 and 4.7 both interrelate together, or separate proposals, but in the same area. We obviously will treat them separately, but I've no doubt that some of the information will cross over, and obviously there's a lot of duplication between the two applications. But I'll ask Mr. Burton to introduce the case. This is number 4.6, which is the erection of a dwelling house in principal land 40 metres southeast of Tedino House in Bleringon. It's classed as application East, I think, in the paperwork, so we'll start with that one. Mr. Burton.
Thank you, Chair. You're correct. There are two sites very closely related, both in the grounds of Tedina House. This first one is the easternmost of the two sites. You can see in the photograph, the aerial photograph there, Tedina House sits just north of the red line boundary. The red line boundary for the other site is to the west of that red line boundary, and they do touch. So the Tedina House is surrounded by a more recently developed building group, which you can see there. Tedina House itself is old and is, as you'll see in the pictures, is fairly dilapidated, and the applicant proposes to restore it to residential use and sell that at the same time as any development which is allowed with these two applications. Next slide, please. So the access road towards Tedina House and the surrounding houses, as you can see, is a single track narrow road with fairly substantial woodland on either side. Next slide, please. That's the access to Tedina House on the right hand side, and on the left hand side you can see one of the newer houses that have been developed around to the rear of Tedina House. Next slide, please. That's looking at the more towards the new housing development. To the rear you can see one house on the left. You can also see a house further down the road, both of which are new. Tedina House sits on the other side of the timber fence to the right hand side of the picture there. That's the roof you can see through the trees. Next slide, please. In the driveway you can see the gable of Teddynow House. This application site is straightforward over the fence and towards the far boundary, which is marked by trees. Next slide, please. That's Teddynow House, which, as you can see, is a substantial stone house, which is not occupied at the moment and is in need of some repair. Next slide, please. So the application site is shown here. It is part of the garden ground of the house, and you can see it's a largely grassed flat site with a tree with mature trees on the boundary. Next slide, please. That's looking back towards Teddynow House from the edge of the application site, and you can see the roofs of the new houses in the background there. Next slide, please. And looking down into the site from Teddynow House, you can see it sits a bit lower than the house itself. Next slide, please. And that's looking into the site from the adjacent site, which is the other application that we'll be discussing soon. You can see some structures in the foreground there which aren't on the application site but are on the next application site. So the application site that we're looking at just now is beyond these structures. And you can see there's a mature tree line boundary between the site and the adjacent fields. Next slide, please. So application in principle, planning permission in principle is sought for the erection of a detached house on land to the southeast of Teddynow House, Bladengon. The application site forms part of the garden ground of the house, which is currently unoccupied in a poor state of repair. It's the applicant's stated aim to restore the house and bring it back to residential use. This application is one of two currently at review, both for the erection of a detached house in the grounds of Teddynow House. The applicant in the appeal statement refers to this house as the East House. It is an open and undeveloped area of garden ground that sits at a lower level than the main house and bounded to the north by the garden boundary of number 6, Teddynow Steading, to the east by the garden of number 5, Teddynow Steading, and to the south by mature trees forming the boundary of Teddynow's garden. To the west, it borders the proposed west plot, the former industrial site. Teddynow House forms part of the building group with 6 other new house detached properties, all of which take access via a private road that connects to the public road. To summarise the applicant's case, the proposed house would sit within the landscape setting of Teddynow House and would form part of the wider building group, which included Teddynow House and 6 newer houses. Teddynow House would remain as the dominant property, as the new houses would be set lower. The new house would be set lower, and it would be seen as successfully integrated with the existing landscape. The applicant would be happy to follow all recommendations of the preliminary ecological appraisal submitted with the application. To summarise the report of handling, the site lies out with the settlement boundary, where Policy 19, Housing in the Countryside of the Local Development Plan, applies. Policy 19 and its associated guidance acknowledges that opportunities exist for housing in rural areas to support the viability of communities, meet development needs in appropriate locations, while safeguarding the character of the countryside, as well as ensuring a high standard of siting and design is achieved. The policy's supplementary planning guidance identifies 6 categories where development can be permitted under Policy 19. The first is building groups. Where buildings appear as an obvious group within their landscape setting, permission may be granted for development within the group or by adding to the group. Permission will be granted for houses within building groups, provided it can be demonstrated that new housing will respect the character, scale and form of the existing group and will be integrated into the existing layout and building pattern. New housing will not detract from the visual amenity of the group when viewed from the wider landscape, and a high standard of residential amenity will be provided both for existing and new housing. In addition, permission may be granted subject to this criteria for houses which extend a group into a readily definable adjacent site. In this case, Teddynow House is a traditional dwelling house with significant woodland resource which contributes to the setting of the house and the new Steading style development to the north and east. The formation of a house plot to the southeast of Tediano would not respect the character and form of the existing group, sitting awkwardly in relation to existing housing to the north and east. Development here, along with the proposed site to the west, would engulf and surround Tediano House but would not integrate into the existing layout and building pattern, and it would detract from the visual amenity of the group when viewed from the wider landscape. In addition, with the plot being forward of the principal elevation of Tediano House, a high standard of residential amenity would not be provided either for existing or the new housing. Taking account of the above, there is no support for the principle of residential development on the site under Policy 19. The indicative siting of the proposed house and garage is likely to impact significantly on the setting and amenity of existing houses and on the existing woodland. The supporting statement suggests that full advantage will be taken of the southern aspect of the site to benefit from solar gain. For this, it's likely that additional trees would be required to be removed, which would diminish the landscape setting of the wider building group. Policy 40A, Forest and Woodland Strategy, that seeks to protect existing trees, and Policy 40B, Trees, Woodland and Development, states that there will be a presumption in favour of protecting woodland resources. The proposed development is likely to result in tree loss and pressure for further removal of trees. This would be to the detriment of the landscape setting of the building group and would lead to an erosion of local distinctiveness and quality of landscape. There were 5 public representations received, of which 3 object to the application on the grounds of contrary to policy, possibility for further infill, no access rights to the application site, no agreement in place for utility connections, water supply and drainage issues, tree felling, shortcomings in the ecological report, more information required on bats, hedgehogs and red squirrels, blue line ownership boundary incorrect, passing places required, design should be sympathetic to neighbouring buildings, and unsustainable travel patterns. Material considerations, policies 19, 1A and 1B and 40 of the local development plan are all relevant. Of the objections, the comment on the ecological report, passing places and potentially unsustainable nature of the site are material. Also relevant is policy 17, rural homes of National Planning Framework 4. Category A, new homes in rural areas and remote rural areas, says that they will be supported where a proposal supports and sustains existing fragile communities, supports identified local housing outcomes, and is suitable in terms of location, access, and environmental impact. Observations. The preliminary ecological appraisal recommends a specialist bat survey, which has not been submitted. The proposal accords to some extent with the first category, building groups, in Policy 19. The decision before the committee today is whether it respects the 3 requirements identified in the handling report and whether a new house in this location would constitute sustainable development. In addition, cognizance must be taken of the above mentioned policy of National Planning Framework 4. Thank you, Chair. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Burton. And we'll open to questions now. Members, if I can just remind you, we've obviously got 2 properties very closely associated, and your questions will probably cover to some extent both, but if we can try to concentrate on this property, which is designated as for the east plot. So I'll open up Councillor McLaren.
Again, Mr. Burton has provided us with a very detailed submission, and I don't really have any questions at this stage, but thank you for your detailed submission.
Thank you. Councillor Anderson.
From the aerial photograph, we see there's quite a amount of trees on the site. This one, can it be? Well, I'm not sure whether it could be developed without damage to trees, but it seems fairly obvious that there will be some damage done to trees, which really, or removal of trees, which will really be against the new policy we got upon us.
That point is made in the handling report, Councillor, and I think it's inevitable that some damage would occur to trees. In addition to that, the applicant has mentioned using benefits of solar gain from the south-facing aspect of the site, which would seem to suggest that at least some of the mature trees on the southern boundary would have to be removed.
Yeah, because looking at the aerial photograph says that develop anything to the north. If I'm looking, is that north? If I'm looking up,
Yes.
there's hardly any trees. No, most of the trees are on this area, the garden ground. So, and there's also in the report mention of possible pollution of the garden ground, well, ground within that area. How heavy is that pollution?
There's no pollution mentioned in this application, Councillor, but in the accompanying application, or the adjacent application. It is true, however, that contamination, if present in the adjacent site, could also affect this site.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Anderson's asked the question I was going to ask, so I have no more questions from me on this one. So members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is, the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor McLaren.
Happy to proceed.
And Councillor Anderson.
I'm happy.
Thank you both, and I too am happy to proceed at this stage. Obviously, that we have two associated applications here. Various points raised by the representations. I think the comments were regarding the access on the track. Obviously, that's a legal matter, not something we're planning to assess. There was also comments about unsustainable transport, but obviously the people who are living there already have indulging in unsustainable transport, so I'm not sure I can see the reason for that one. However, this site obviously, as Mr. Burton has said, hasn't had any sources of contamination, but I feel that that may have washed in through underground water and surface water. So my thoughts at this stage, to be fair, would be to defer the application for a full contamination report. The one we have is a desktop one, I believe, for a full contamination report, which would include any remediation plans to deal with that contamination. That would be my thought at this stage, and then have development management assess that report before it comes back to ourselves. But obviously it depends on my colleagues. So Councillor McLaren.
It's me.
Thank you, convener. Yes, again, I am in agreement with you. And
sorry. Yeah, thanks. We're in a slightly unusual position where Councillor Braun has suggested deferral, although the other councillors want to proceed. So I think Councillor Braun is coming back to both of you and whether you wish to defer or not. We're not actually making a full decision, or you're just deciding whether to defer. It is not in the past the practice of the LRB for site visits for wind farms. If one wanted it, then it was done. But strictly speaking, for a deferral, it's by majority, strictly speaking. But one member, namely convener on this occasion, is saying that he would like more information before making a decision. So that's the context of which you're at the moment.
thank you for that clarity. I mean, I was in a sort of seesaw thought process here, given the information in front of us, and it is clear that we possibly don't have fully, although I did agree that I was happy to proceed with the information in front of us. But as Councillor Braun has pointed out, to be fair, it would be, it could be advisable to defer. So I too would agree with Councillor Braun on this occasion to defer. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Anderson.
I would agree with you to defer.
So another unanimous decision on this one, to defer the case for that further information on the contamination report.
Thank you, convener. I think if I could narrate it this way from what I heard you say, we defer for the applicant to provide a full contaminated land report and with a remediation plan. And of course, development management being given the opportunity to comment on that before it then comes back to to the LRB at a later stage. Just to be clear, this is the east plot you're dealing with at the moment, and I know I think there is potential for leaching. There is a reference in the report so far as a potential overlap between the two sites, so hence the deferral for the contaminated land report.
Thank you. That's correct. Yes, thank you
Yes.
very much. Yeah. Thank you, members. So we'll now move on to item 4.7, which is now the same area, but now what's designated as the west plot. Erection of a dwelling house, in principle, again, 35 metres southwest of Telino House in Blairgowrie. So, Mr. Burton, if you'd like to introduce that one.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take you through the pictures first. The sites are adjacent, but they are quite different. So the application site boundary, you can see in red there, a lot more trees on the site than are on the site we've just considered. So next slide, please. Again, the access to the site. This site, the site we're considering now, is just to the left of that picture. Next slide, please. And the application site, looking at towards Telino House, is on the right-hand side, on the other side of the wall that you can see with the mature trees beside it. Next slide, please. The building you can see with the green roof to the right is a part of the application site. The application site was apparently used for some undefined, well, defined to some extent, industrial purpose metal working. Next slide, please. So you can see within this, there's an entirely different feel to this site. It has previously been developed for metal fabrication, and there are buildings on site. There's also a lot more trees on site, as you can begin to see there. Next slide, please. So the buildings on site are not the prettiest, as you can see. They are a variety of different types of building, a variety of different materials. Clearly a concrete platform to the front and block buildings and a larger shed at the back. There's no indication that I can see of when it was last used for any industrial process, but apparently it was used for metal manufacture, metal working in the past. Next slide, please. Looking towards the site from the driveway in front of Telino House, that's part of the site in front there, but it's also around to the right hand side where the buildings that you've just viewed are situated. Next slide, please. So the site is, as you can see, was partly covered by the buildings you saw, partly treed and partly open, so quite different from the first site. So planning permission sought in principle for the erection of a detached house on the site which used to form part of the garden ground of Telino House. The applicant in the appeal statement refers to this house as the West House. The site's in an area of garden ground that sits at a lower level than the main house and was previously the subject of industrial use, which has only recently ended. The site has the remnants of heavy engineering tools, oil drums and equipment and various buildings which were used for metal fabrication. A full intrusive ground investigation has not taken place, but commentary of this land is included in the Geo-Environmental Design Report, which states that there's likely to be contamination that needs to be dealt with in developing the land for a new dwelling. It's bounded to the north by the shared driveway to Telino and the other houses in the building group, to the east by Telino House and the proposed east plot, and to the south and west by mature woodland and open countryside. To summarise the applicant's case, the proposed house would sit within the landscape setting of Tethynow House and would form part of the wider building group, including the house and the 6 newer houses in the existing group. Tethynow would remain as a dominant property. The new house would be set lower and would be successfully integrated within the existing landscape. The site is severely degraded due to its previous industrial use, and its redevelopment will allow for the contamination that is certainly present to be dealt with. As such, development is acceptable under Category 5 of Policy 19, conversion or replacement of redundant traditional non-domestic buildings, as well as Category 1. Category 1 building groups is relevant because the west plot clearly sits within the landscape setting of the building group that is defined on this edge by the mature planting and the trees on the edge of the Tethynow garden. To summarise the report of handling, the site lies out with the settlement boundary, so Policy 19, Housing and Countryside, applies. This policy acknowledges that opportunities exist for housing in rural areas to meet development needs while safeguarding the character of the countryside, as well as ensuring a high standard of siting and design is achieved. The policy's supplementary planning guidance identifies 6 categories where development can be permitted under Policy 19. The first is building groups. Also of relevance is Category 6, brownfield land, given the industrial history of part of the site. This category requires the site to be cleared of buildings and to require remediation before being reused. A remediation plan is required to be submitted with the planning application. While an initial survey has been submitted, this does not appear to suggest that the whole site is contaminated, and the former outbuildings and industrial compound only affects a small part of the site. The criteria in the brownfield part of the Housing and the Countryside policy are therefore not met. Category 1 of the policy states that where buildings appear as an obvious group within their landscape setting, permission may be granted for development within the group or by adding to the group. Permission can be granted provided it can be demonstrated that new housing will respect the character, scale and form of the existing group and will be integrated into the existing layout and building pattern. That new housing will not detract from the visual amenity of the group, and that a high standard of residential amenity will be provided for existing and new housing. The formation of a house plot to the southwest of Tethynow House would not respect the character and form of the existing group, sitting awkwardly in relation to the existing housing. Development here, along with the proposed site to the east, would engulf and surround Tethynow House and would not integrate into the existing layout and building pattern, and it would detract from the visual amenity of the group when viewed from the wider landscape. Taking account of the above, there is no support for the principle of residential development of the site under Policy 19. The indicative siting of the proposed house and garage is likely to impact significantly on the setting and amenity of existing houses and on existing woodland. The supporting statement suggests that full advantage would be taken of the southern aspect of the site to benefit from solar gain. For this, it's likely that additional trees would be removed, which would diminish the landscape setting of the wider building group. Policy 40A, Forest and Woodland Strategy, and Policy 40B, Trees, state that there will be presumption in favour of protecting woodland resources. The proposed development is likely to result in tree loss and pressure for the further removal of trees. This would be to the detriment of the landscape setting of the building group and would lead to an erosion of local distinctiveness, diversity, and quality of landscape experience. 5 public representations were received, of which 3 object to the application on the grounds that the proposal is contrary to Housing in the Countryside policy. There is a possibility for further infill. There are no access rights to the application site, no agreement in place for utility connections, water supply, drainage issues, tree felling, shortcomings in ecological report, the blue line ownership boundary is incorrect, passing places are required, the design should be sympathetic to neighbouring buildings, and unsustainable travel patterns. So material considerations, policies 19, 1A, 1B and 40 are all relevant. Of the objections, the comment on the ecological report, passing places and potentially unsustainable nature of the site are material. Also relevant is policy 17, rural homes of National Planning Framework 4. Part A of that policy says development proposals for new homes in rural areas areas will be supported where the development is suitably scaled, sited and designed to be in keeping with the character of the area, and the development reuses brownfield land where a return to natural state has not or will not happen without intervention. Observations on the application. The preliminary ecological appraisal recommends a specialist bat survey. The geotechnical report suggests there are underground oil storage tanks and other elements on site which will require removal if the site's to be developed, and that an application should be accompanied by a remediation plan, which has not been submitted. Thank you, Chair. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Burton. Have you any questions, Councillor Anderson?
Just looking, I just wondered how many years ago this aerial photograph was taken. It seems to be somewhat different to what we saw on the ground.
I'm afraid I just relied on Google for that, Councillor, and I can't recall the date on that. But you're right, it looks to be a time when the house was perhaps in better repair than it is now.
Not the house, but the ground, it's all green. What we saw was hardly a tree. It was only perimeter trees we saw on the site on the photographs. And then we saw a bit of on that building, you know, the apron on site and what debris there is on the ground. You could see through the site, but with that cover, you couldn't see as shown on there. It's completely different. But I'm just concerned that also because if it was a metalworking, that's only been fairly recent. Then if it's knowing Google's quite a recent.
The main point you're making is quite correct, Councillor. That is clearly taken within summer when the leaves have trees and you can't see through them. Whereas I took the pictures just a couple of weeks ago when it was winter, and you can obviously see through the trees. Had that been taken in winter, you might be able to make out the buildings, which still remain from the metal fabrication site.
Thank you.
Councillor McLaren.
Again, thank you for your submission, and I have no questions.
And on this occasion, I have no questions either for this one. So members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor Anderson.
You can make a decision.
Are you happy to proceed, Councillor Anderson and Martin? Yeah.
I'm happy to proceed.
And Councillor McLaren.
Happy to proceed.
I too am happy to proceed on this one. I suppose in asking for a deferral on the first one, I indicate that the site which was designated as east does have some potential. I'm afraid on this one I can't say the same. I have some concerns on this one to the extent that the considerable number of trees may well have to be removed still, heavy contamination on the land. And I'm also concerned, obviously, that if the building was established, it would change the building line, bring that building line forward. So on this occasion, for this site, this is to make it clear, the west, designated west. I'm going to refuse the appeal and accept the points, the reasons for refusal by the planning officer on this occasion. I would add, I think Mr. Burton mentioned again, MPF 4. So we may have to add some conditions on there, but for the moment, I'll leave it for my colleagues to make their points. So, Councillor McLaren.
Thank you. Well, we are yet again. I have a feeling. This proposed site has less attraction due to the other aspects that have been listed. And I too would uphold the refusal on the grounds of all the points our officers have noted. So that's all. Thank you.
And Councillor Anderson.
I'd concur with my other members. Do you refuse?
Thank you. Mr. Elliott, again, we're here with a unanimous decision.
Yes, thank you, Convener. Yes, take you to page 751, 752. Now, Convener, I didn't hear anything in terms of changing the existing grounds 1, 2, 3 and 4, but you did mention potential additional grounds reviews.
Yes, I think because we've got now National Policy Framework 4. So if I may, I'm going to suggest 2 further conditions. This would be condition, with my paper around now, condition 5, which would be the proposal is contrary to policy 17A of NPF 4. Rural homes as a development of the site would not be in keeping with the character of the area. That's number 5. And suggestions for a 6th condition would be the proposal is contrary to policy 17A2 of NPF 4 rural homes, as it has not been demonstrated that the land has not or will not return to a natural state without intervention. I'll leave it to you perhaps to just polish that a little bit, but I think the gist of what we're trying to say is there.
Yes, I think I have that. Again, grounds 1, 2, 3 and 4 remain the same. Then you add additional ground of refusal, not condition, but ground of refusal 5, proposal contrary to policy 17A, National Planning Framework 4, rural homes as development of this site would not be in keeping with the character of the area. And ground of refusal 6, the proposal is contrary to policy 17A2 of National Planning Framework 4, rural homes, as it's not been demonstrated, kind of looking at the wording of NPF 4 here, as it's not been demonstrated that the land has not or will not return to a natural state without intervention.
That's correct.
So I think we have to look to your wing members and see whether they agree with that.
I am in agreement with Councillor Braun. Thank you.
And Councillor Anderson.
I agree.
Thank you. So we're there. Okay, fine. So members, we'll now move on to the last item of the morning. The afternoon, sorry, we lost track of time here. You do, and this sort of thing. Item 4.8, which is another extension. It's alterations and extension to dwelling house, formation of vehicular access and driveway, erection of gates and associated works at 2 Oakbank Crescent in Perth. And Mr. Burton, if you would lead us through on this last case.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take you through the pictures first. The aerial photograph shows the application site bounded in red with a fairly substantial garden. You can see the size of the application building is actually quite small. It's the original bungalow that was built there. Next slide, please. So from the street, it's a traditional bungalow. As I said, fairly small. It only has 4 rooms, I think, inside it. It's currently unoccupied. It's being converted. It's being worked on at the moment. Next slide, please. You can see the skip in the driveway. It shows that there's work going on inside the house to renovate and improve it. Next slide, please. To the rear of the house, you can see that the garden sits lower than the house. It slopes down, and the application proposals make use of that by sinking the proposed extension down into that rear garden. Next slide, please. And looking from the back of the garden up to the house, you can see there's a fairly substantial levels difference between the house and the garden area. And as I said, the extension would make use of this by being at the lower level, which would allow the addition of a roof of a room in the roof without extending the ridge height. Next slide, please. Looking down towards the garden, you can see a partly built garden house, garden room on the very edge of the garden. Next slide, please. This is looking to the side of the garden, to the boundary to the side rather. You can see the partly built garden room at the corner of the garden, which the applicant has stated is within permitted development guidelines. Next slide, please. So the proposal is to extend the detached bungalow that you see there to build a two-storey extension. The rear garden of the house is approximately 1 metre lower than the front. The proposed design makes use of this difference by placing the ground floor of the extension lower than the ground floor of the existing house, which also allows for an upper floor to the extension to be no higher than the existing roof. The bungalow currently has 2 bedrooms, a lounge, kitchen and conservatory. The existing house would have an open plan lounge, kitchen, dining area, 4 bedrooms, a playroom and a utility room. The ground floor extension would extend 3.3 metres beyond the existing side. The elements extending beyond the side walls would have flat roofs. The existing roof would be extended to the rear to accommodate both the central part of the ground floor extension and the upper floor extension. The extension would project 6.7 metres back from the existing rear wall. Finishing materials would be render and timber cladding. To summarise the applicant's case, the rationale for creating the principal living space at the lower ground floor of the extension is to better connect the house with the garden and to ensure the extension is less visible from the road, maintaining the character and visual amenity of the area. The design attempts to ensure the extension respects the shape, scale and character of the existing bungalow. The placemaking guide states that extensions in most cases should be a subordinate addition. However, this is not absolute. Every proposal should be assessed on its own merits, and the view that the extension is unacceptable because it's not a subordinate addition is challenged. The claim by the case officer that the proposed extension would more than triple the floor area of the bungalow, bringing it up to 235 square metres is incorrect. The ground and lower ground floor area would be 159 square metres, with another 44 square metres on the upper floor, totaling 203 square metres of internal floor space. The proposals will result in a 63 square metre larger developed footprint than currently. The current size of the house is exceptionally small, well below modern space standards. The applicants have sought to retain the existing bungalow and use the extension to create a comfortable, reasonably sized family home, which creates a more coherent dwelling than building multiple smaller extensions or piecemeal additions, which can be seen on some neighbouring properties. In addition, the principal elevation of the house will not be dramatically altered. The alternative of extending the bungalow is to demolish it and replace it with an entirely new house that achieves modern space standards, as has been done nearby. However, this not only has greater potential to result in a more significant visual impact, but is less sustainable than would be contrary to current local development plan policies and guidance. Further, sustainable design and construction lends itself easily to refurbishment schemes offering cost-effective opportunities for development. This proposal has sought to utilise the existing house while improving and extending it to create a home that meets modern space standards and significantly improves its energy efficiency. To summarise the report of handling, flat-roofed single-storey wing extensions are proposed to either side of the proposed two-storey gabled extension. The wings would overspill to both sides. The width proposed at 16 metres far exceeds the width of the existing house at 9.3 metres. Accordingly, the proposals, by virtue of their competing form, excessive proportions and inappropriate design, would result in an extension which is unsympathetic to the existing bungalow. The proposals would have a dominating effect on the bungalow and an adverse impact on the character and visual amenity of the area, contrary to the placemaking guide and policies 1A, 1B, and 17C of the local development plan, which seek to ensure development contributes positively to the quality of the surrounding built environment. Taking the position, height and orientation of the proposed development and intervening boundary treatments into account, the proposals would not have a detrimental overshadowing impact on neighbouring properties. The distance from the proposed windows to the eastern boundary is 14 metres, which is adequate to ensure overlooking and loss of privacy is not an issue of planning concern. The original bungalow measures 77.25 square metres, with the conservatory, which is to be removed, measuring an additional 10.25 square metres. The proposed extensions would more than triple the ground area of the bungalow, the floor area of the bungalow, bringing it up to 235 square metres, 183 square metres at ground floor level, with an additional 52 square metres at first floor level. While the property benefits from having spacious garden grounds, the successive footprint increase constitutes overdevelopment. 2 public representations were received giving the following grounds: loss of light, overdevelopment, excessive height, overlooking and loss of privacy. Policies 1A, material considerations, policies 1A and 1B of the placemaking guide are relevant. Of the objections, the comments on loss of light and overlooking are material, but are assessed by the case officer to be satisfactory. Some observations: the applicants have attempted by using the ground level differences to accommodate the extension to minimise its visual impact, particularly from the front. The fact remains, however, that the flat roofs of the 2 ground floor wings would be visible from the road. The committee needs to take a view on whether that means that the proposal accords or does not accord with council policy and guidance. Thank you, Chair. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Burton. Councillor Anderson, any questions?
I was just looking at the ground floor area. The main objection was that, well, objections are that it's overextensions, too large a house as such within that area. But looking at the plans I see in front of me here, number 20 on Fraser Terrace and also number 4 on Oak Bank Crescent, it's there. It almost covers the same areas on the ground, same floor footage, and both these sites are larger. The sites of the applicant is larger than these ones I'm comparing with. Is that correct?
I think you are correct. Because the application site extends to the rear, then it has a larger rear garden than certainly the adjacent site. You can, as you can see on the aerial photograph there.
And I say just the way that the proposed development, that they're taking down the level to allow the roof line to come to the rear through and get an extra story in that area. It won't detract roof lights or anything else, or lights or anything else, windows to the neighbours. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor McLaren.
Thank you. You know, our officers are citing excessive overdevelopment. Just for clarity, is we saw in the pictures a garden shed area in construction? That's not part of this application, is it?
No, it's not. It's referred to as being permitted development.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, combining. Okay.
Just one clarification, just in my mind. These wings which we're talking about at each side, they will be set at the lower level. So, you will see them. There's an image, a proposed image here, which I'm looking at on page 990. With the 2 vehicle accesses, you can see them, but obviously they're set lower. So I presume they're obviously at the lower level in the ground.
That's correct. They are set lower. I'm trying to find the street. There's a street view.
Page 990.
Page 990. Well, I can see one in our papers, page 1009 of our papers, which gives a street view, a view from the street, proposed west elevation. So the proposed west elevation on that, on page 1009 at the top left, you can see the height of the wings extending to each side of the house in relation to the house would be round about the level of the bottom of the ground floor windows.
Fine, thank you. As we have no further questions, we'll move on to the next stage. Members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor Anderson
I'm happy.
and Councillor McLaren.
Happy to proceed.
Fine, and I turn happy to proceed. So Councillor McLaren, would you like to lead on this one for us?
In at the deep end. So given the information in front of us and the submission from Mr. Burton, I am going to agree with our officers and uphold the refusal excessive overdevelopment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So I'll take a next decision. On contrary, I'm going to accept the appeal on this one. I would prefer perhaps without the wings at the side. I think perhaps that may just slightly be pushing a little bit, but I thought it would be unfair to refuse it just on that basis. Number two, as Councillor Anderson pointed out, will with the extension stretch back no further than number 4 next door, and we'll complete a building line there. Yes, these 2 wings will overhang each side, but I don't think they're visually that bad. They are set lower than the road level. You will just see them, and of course with vehicles parked in there, I don't think they'd be too obtrusive. As I say, it would be better if they hadn't been there, but I think given that the house does need to have some extension work, it is very small for modern living. I think it would be unfair to decline it, to refuse the appeal simply because of that. So I'm happy to grant the appeal on this occasion. Councillor Anderson, you have the balance in your hands.
Yes, but I will agree with my convener that we grant the appeal, and for the reasons he stated very clearly. Thank you very much.
So, Mr. Elliott, to finish, we have a majority decision on this occasion.
Yes, majority decision, Convener 2-1, to grant subject to suitable conditions and informatives. And from what I heard, it's basically you think it just accords with the development plan. And of course, minority decision to refuse in line with the appointed officer's grounded refusal. Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. That now brings us to the end of this local review board, local review body, I should say. I would therefore like to just thank my colleagues for their indulgence today. It's been a particularly long committee meeting. So my thanks to them both for being with us and obviously reading all the material that's gone through it. It's very complicated and very full this time. So my thanks to them. Thanks to Mr. Burton, who's prepared all the work, and of course to Mr. Elliott for his advice and information as we've gone along. And also my thanks to Mr. Williams, who's been scribbling away or typing away at the background there throughout the meeting. So thank you all. It's been, as I say, a particularly long one today, but an interesting one. Thank you all very much, and we'll see you next month.